Welcome back to Kings of the North, a very special edition about video games or a video game. Doug Lesmerises and Matt Brown, our colleague from the Extra Points newsletter, the foremost expert on the EA college sports video game that is coming back. We're going to talk about how this is happening, why it is happening, what's going to be in the game, what northern things do we know are going to be part of this football game that is coming back. And then we're going to suggest who we think should be on the cover. And like how Matt knows all this stuff. So Matt, like, first of all, this news popped last week, right? Like what are we talking about here? It felt like it was a seismic moment in college football that a video game is back.
There were just legions of men from their late 20s to early 40s openly weeping because this enormous event here that was such an important part of their early adulthood and like late teenagehood is coming back. And like in terms of like hard news, what we learned last week really wasn't a lot. EA Sports updated their Twitter bio and Twitter logo for the new game, and also aired a 1.5-minute commercial, which reiterated what they've said in public several times over the last year, and what I've reported numerous times, that the game is in fact happening and it is coming this summer. They didn't say this. I'm reporting this. It's going to come in July. Okay. We'll know the exact date in a little bit. And then like the commercial
in stores and available on, like, you can buy it in July.
Yes, you will be able to go to GameStop if you are for some reason still using physical media, or you could download the game in July. Okay. And the commercial showed all of these old, or not old, like new digitally rendered mascots and uniforms and traditions and stadiums, all the kind of things that make college football different from Madden, a part of this game, and setting expectations for when the company itself is prepared to share more information.
Okay, so it's been a decade, right? The last game was in 2014. Are you surprised? And it's like, right, lawsuits. We're like, hey, you got to pay players for this. And they're like, well, we're going to pay players. We're not doing a game. Are you surprised it took this long? Or are you surprised maybe it didn't take longer? Or like a decade off, given all the changes in college sports, is this about right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great that it's coming back, and we could talk about the what this means from a business perspective and a marketing perspective, because this kind of thing has always been bigger than just a single video game. And I think it's important to remind people that the reason we haven't had a game for several years is not because of Ed O'Bannon, who was the former UCLA basketball player, who's the namesake for the famous lawsuit. And it actually wasn't because of EA, because EA made it clear, okay, if we have to pay the players, we'll pay the players. We're a gigantic video game company. We print money with FIFA. We'll be happy to pay the players. It was the NCAA who said, no. That if you give athletes money for their likenesses in this game, that breaks the sacred tenets of amateurism. We can't have that.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until states began to push for NIL reform. It wasn't until the NCAA lost Alston and realized, oh my gosh, now we're not going to get the deference in federal courts about a lot of our previous assumptions. That all of these things coalesced to make it possible and politically tenable to bring this game back, where they'll be paying not just the schools for their intellectual property, but thousands and thousands of athletes for theirs.
What are they going to do? Send them like a $20 bill? Do we know how the individual players are going to get paid for this?
Yeah, so this is actually something I hope to have a little bit more specific information on at Extra Points in the coming days. But the way that it's been explained to me so far is that EA is partnering with a company called One Team Partners, which also handles the group license for Madden and handles group licensing in the pros for a couple of other projects, to present a group license to every scholarship FBS player across all the rosters, right? 84 athletes, 134 teams. And when I say group license, what that means is that everybody gets the same deal. And they get that same deal because it's completely impractical to expect EA to individually negotiate 12,000 different contracts, right? Which is the way that Madden and NBA 2K and NHL and everything work. So from the deal itself, that means that, Will Howard and whoever Will Howard's long snapper is are going to get the same check for participating in the game. There may be opportunities for extra marketing money or other campaigns, but the group license itself is the same.
Okay.
And it's not going to be $50. It's definitely not going to be $15,000, which is, around what people are making for Madden. Somewhere between $500 and $1,200, and a copy of the game, I think is going to be the most likely, check, which not earth-shattering money, but I think you'll be rare that you're going to find an athlete that's going to be upset about that.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of the athletes, like, they just want the game back, right? They think it's cool to be in the game. Yeah.
I mean, wouldn't it be cool if you were in the game? I'd be over the moon if I was in the game. This is
Well,
it's a
you
physical
are in the
system.
game. You are the
Uh,
financial one. You want to do the financial stuff. And
I
when
would
you
like
want
to
to,
be.
you made a game, you made an athletic director simulator. That
Oh,
should be part of this game.
yeah, oh, I mean, I've joked about that with some developers, right? Like, look, if you want to sublicense this thing, guys, you've got my phone number. But like other reporters have been in other video games,
Yeah.
they don't get money for it. But this is how you get the respect of your children. This is a physical testament to what you accomplished. Like it's really an emotional thing. And I legit, this is not me being hyperbolic or a prisoner of the moment. I think if we talk to athletes in the Big Ten and say, like, what will be more emotionally valuable to you, right? Your first big collective check, the first big thing that you bought, or being in this game. And I think you're going to find athletes that are like, look, I love the car, but emotionally, it's a bigger deal for you to be in the game.
I'm hoping as Kings of the North grows, that maybe down the line, you would be able to like hit a button in the game where I would come on and say the South can cram it, right? That like,
yeah, that's DLC.
Georgia's playing Utah in your game. It's like, I'm going to be Utah. You want to play? I'm going to play Georgia. And then my head pops up and says, the South can cram it. And then you pop in and explain money.
The joke that I've kind of proposed to some of the devs, right? Because like a lot of these games, they have like a little Twitter feature, right? Where it's like, oh, here's Nicole Auerbach telling you that somebody's injured for next week, and here's Brett McMurphy giving you an update on lines. Like what I had suggested was that I should pop up, and all I do is give updates about next year's video game, and just kind of lean into it, right? We'll kind of see who has a sense of humor about it. But yeah, that'd be great. Like, oh, so and so is your recruiting budget is smaller because Matt filed a FOIA, and now USA Today's on your ass. Like that. There's ways we can make this fun.
Can you imagine like playing a video game? It's like your kids in the basement. It's like, hey, you playing the video game? What are you doing? It's like, I'm filing a Freedom of Information Act request. It's so fun. All right. So what do we know? All right. So we're going to talk a little bit later about how you know all this stuff. But like, what do we know? The game's been off for a decade. So I would imagine there's programmers and people like creative people sitting at EA Sports who are like, man, when we come back, we're going to add this. We're going to add this. What do we know about what's going to be in this version of the game?
So one of the exciting things about writing about this kind of project is EA has to work with hundreds of public institutions and bring in lots of different people in that decision-making process, which means you can get leaks or you can get information. So like one of the things that I can tell everybody here is that it is a priority of EA to make this game as realistic a depiction of what college football is actually like as possible. And part of that means really leaning into what makes college football distinct from Madden. And a major part of that is the individual pageantry and iconography of each school. So EA has asked all these participating schools for a ton of very granular data about their program. So part of that is we can't use any of the code, any of the images from the last game. It was a decade ago. So we need to re-render every single stadium. And to do that, they've asked schools to take like thousands and thousands of pictures inside each stadium to get it from every conceivable angle, to get all of the iconic buildings around the stadium, the locker room, the tunnel, so then they can render Ohio Stadium or Ben Hill Griffin Stadium or whatever, the Rubber Bowl in its exact 3D glory, something they haven't had here in a minute. Then they've asked all the schools, we also want to get every possible audio asset we can of your game day experience. We want to know what music and what sounds you're playing in pregame. We want to know what you're playing between the third and the fourth quarters. We want to know what sound effect you play on third down and when somebody commits a penalty. And we don't even care if you don't own the rights to that. If you're playing rock music or rap or anything else, let us know because we might try to pay for that licensing too.
They can't pay for that. They cannot pay the Killers for Mr. Brightside.
Oh,
and they cannot pay for Jump Around. That's too much money.
Do you realize how much money these guys have?
They have enough money for Mr. Brightside?
So I can't confirm Mr. Brightside or Seven Nation Army specifically, but like I've seen enough. If there's eight different bands say we're submitting neck, they're going to cut a check and figure out a way to make that happen. So for Ohio State specifically, right? That means you're going to hear the APO guys bringing the bell tower. You're going to hear the non-R-rated student chants. You're going to hear what's happening in pregame, and here's what the marching band is doing. All of that stuff is part of what EA has asked for. Then there's we want all of the uniforms. We don't just want your home alternate and major away one. We want to know, hey, what was the stuff you got out in the 80s? What is your beloved iconic uniform from the 60s? Ohio State's had a bunch of pretty creative blackout uniforms. They wear the white alternates sometimes. Like, so there's, Michigan does this, Utah does this whole catalog, right? Because we want those to be depicted so people can pick what they want to wear, down to where are the helmet stickers and how often are the helmet stickers distributed? And so what does the Buckeye helmet look like in August versus October versus November? Where does the captain's patch go? All this very nitty gritty stuff, to go with changes in recruiting, changes in roster management, changes in gameplay itself. So what I tell everybody is, like, I can't promise that the game's going to be good. I can't promise that it'll be perfect, but I can tell you from, and we could talk about how I know this in a little bit, but from like direct conversations and from documents, we can say, like, they're trying to replicate as much as they possibly can about what makes Madison and Columbus and Ann Arbor and Salt Lake City and Seattle special on a fall Saturday.
So specifically about some of the aspects of college football that are different than the NFL, will there be NIL stuff related to the recruitment aspect of this part of the game? How are they in any way trying to replicate or measure how much recruiting has changed since the last time they did this game a decade ago?
Yeah. So what I can say is that the folks at EA are very cognizant of the fact that recruiting looks very different than it did the last time the game came out.
Can I ask, by the way, do you know, in the previous incarnation of the game, did they have a thing where if you were playing with the Southern school, you could go into a McDonald's and leave $5,000 in a paper bag for one of your recruits? Do you know, was that part of it?
You had to pay, the thing is, you had to pay extra for it. Which, which kind of, it felt a little bit on the nose in the last game, right? It was, pay $19.99 to go get the poker chips, right? Or to go to the gas station that serves the really good fried chicken and also the briefcase full of money. Not sure exactly what that's going to look like in the next game.
Okay.
I'm kidding, by the way, like, because Reddit can't take a joke.
I would pay.
Sure. So here's what I can say, right? Like, I know of at least one dear friend of this show that was paid to be a consultant, and I think had to sign an NDA to explain what recruiting looks like right now. There have been other national writers who have done the same, and EA has historically also used coaches, both retired and current, to serve as consultants, not just for how the recruiting process works, but also for the depictions of certain plays. Like in Madden, so the playbook has gotten so complicated that there have been like real NFL teams that use this to teach particular principles. Yeah. You'll go home, you watch film, do the playbook, and also play Madden. What I have been told is transfer portal and NIL in some capacity are part of it. Does that what that looks like in specific practice? Those folks have been very mum, which I understand, especially because the game's not out for a couple months. They might make a few tweaks. I don't think, I could be wrong, but I don't think schools are going to allow a game to use their licenses if you can like press A to commit crew crimes. Maybe that would surprise me a little bit, given the IP involved here.
Not too realistic, man. Hey, not too realistic. Hey,
that's we had to save that for simulator. We're gonna save that for my stuff. Like let the cheating be the things that we control. But in the previous games, people basically never transferred. You can't have a realistic game right now without the option to build 25% of your roster at least through the transfer portal. So I would imagine that's going to be part of it.
Yeah.
You might have your program given like a rating for campus environment. Do we mean that that's supposed to be a stand-in for something else? You'll no say. We'll have to play the game to find out.
Campus environment is whatever you want it to mean. Oh, I love the campus environment.
I'm going to get some nasty grams from somebody at EA about that. But could be lots of things.
All right. So specifically for the northern schools that we care about the most, again, like what you what do? You break into computers? What do you do? How do you get information?
I do it through two different ways.
You're a spy?
I can't tell you if I'm a spy.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like, don't worry about it. Yeah. Surprise. Matt Brown.
If you ever get caught, you know who you would call? You would call Stetson Bennett, college football lawyer, who would defend you as a spy.
Stetson Bennett will.
Matt Brown is a principled man who would never. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I can't fit into my white suit anymore, right? Because I used to live in the South, right? Used to be able to get clothes like that, but that was probably 25 pounds ago.
Sucker. Yeah.
No, so I do it in 2 ways or 3 ways, right? The first way is how we get a lot of my financial information reporting. Good old open records requests.
Yeah.
Correspondence that EA sends to licensing agents or associate athletic directors at public schools is a public record, and so you can file requests to inspect copies of that. And that's how I got the original project proposal for the video game that was sent from CLC, which is the major licensing company for all of this. It's how I've gotten requests from EA for specific assets. And then I can get a copy of those and then send it to 60 different schools saying, hey, I know EA asked for X, Y, and Z. Show me what you sent. You can do that for one way. Once you do that at scale, sometimes I can call up a private school and just say, come on, let me just ask you nicely. I can't compel you through the force of the law. I'm not asking for Fort Knox. I want to, this is a chance to celebrate your school. And a couple of them have done that. Or sometimes I'll call up a school directly and say, we don't need to bring billable hours into this equation. Why don't you just tell me the thing? This is not an adversarial request. And sometimes that happens. That's happened at schools in the North. And then the third way is once you do this for over a year and a half, EA eventually starts returning your phone calls. And it's been an adjustment period for them. And I don't mean this pejoratively. Video game companies are not used to so many transactional bits of information leaking about a major game because you can't foil with the Cleveland Cavaliers. You can make those guys sign NDAs. You often don't find out any information about the next video game release for a private company until just a couple of weeks before it comes out.
You can't foil
that's been
Fortnite,
different.
Whether the guy with the marshmallow head is going to have a new machine gun.
I know. God knows I've tried. Right? If I did that, this would be a very different company. And so now I have a relationship with not just the communication staff, but several developers, many of whom read Extra Points before I even started writing about this, where I can call them up and say, hey, I saw this document. Before I write anything about it, can you help me put this in context? Or is this correct? Or is this not correct? Or Reddit saying this and so I feel like a part of my job has now become the guy that makes the phone call to talk people off the ledge. So it's a mix of traditional access reporting and open records and knowing what questions to ask to get some of this information.
So what else do we know about like cool stuff that you've gathered that's, it's just going to be every song, every part of the stadium, all the locker rooms. So like the big house is going to feel like the big house, and everything at Oregon, you're going to feel like you're going to have 40 different uniform choices with Oregon because that's what Oregon does. Like you're really going to feel the teams that we care about here. Iowa State's going to feel like Iowa State, and Syracuse is going to feel like Syracuse. You're fairly confident that it's going to be a holistic, realistic experience for the team that everybody loves, your individual team.
That I'm comfortable saying in print and on camera, and that there's going to be other trappings that are meant to make these games feel important. The EA has had a long-standing relationship and license with ESPN. I know several individuals that do work for College Game Day have already recorded video and audio assets. Right, Kirk Herbstreit's been the voice of this game for a while. Are you going to hear Herbstreit again in this? Yes, like that's what I've been told. Are you going to see
about Joel and Gus though? About Joel and Gus, ESPN do SEC games now. Joel and Gus,
they do, and some Big 12 games. So with those, all I can say is that historically, the ESPN license has been exclusive with Electronic Arts. I can't confirm that's the case now.
They try to be in charge of everything sometimes.
People ask me about this like literally every week. And Fox PR and CBS PR have not said anything. So on that, I can say I don't know, but I do know that there's going to be ESPN people in there. And there's going to be all the marching bands. There's going to be the bowl games. There's going to be the college football playoff. There's going to be a
12-team. There'll be a 12-team playoff?
There'll be a 12-team playoff.
Oh. Who picks it? Does the game pick who makes the playoff if you play a season?
We're gonna find that out. That's how it's been historically. The way the game would pick based on BCS, right? We already know there's for next year, there's automatic bids. So if you win the Big Ten, you're going to be in the playoff. Presumably, if you go undefeated in the MAC and you beat a good team, you should be in the playoff. Just like that would be the case in real life. I'm hoping to talk to some more people at EA later this week about a few other updates, and those are the kind of things I think I'll ask some more about.
Do they do Script Ohio? Does the game do Script Ohio? Can you watch the band do that?
So Ohio State submitted that.
They did? Oh, okay.
They did. But and what I want to say lest anybody in Columbus or EA scream at me here. I can tell you what Ohio State or what Learfield submitted. I can't necessarily promise that's what's put in the game. But if it's
Okay.
not something, if it's something that Ohio State has the license for, I think that's a reasonable expectation.
What are do you whatever you have like in your brain or in your spy file? What are some of the coolest things that some northern schools maybe submitted to say, "Hey, include this"?
One of the things that I have heard, I think the coolest northern things that's new since the last game is the Iowa wave tradition, right?
Hey, that's very
Right.
cool.
It is
They wave to
legitimately
the
very
hospital
cool.
after the first quarter.
Wave to the hospital,
Yeah.
which is right across the street. The
Oh,
visiting fans do that too, and
that's great.
the stadium images that Iowa was able to take pictures of and scan, would allow that sort of thing to happen. Even if you don't necessarily get the audio rights to jump around, there are ways to depict what Camp Randall looks like in the third quarters, where it looks like
Yeah.
the entire thing is going to collapse and you fear a little bit for your life.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can put that in there. One of the other kind of cool things I wasn't expecting that I've seen from actually a few smaller schools is that EA also gave schools the option to go through your digital yearbook archives and send us pictures of cool things just throughout campus that will help people appreciate that your place is special, because like you might be able to say, hey, my favorite team is Bowling Green, so during a loading screen show me iconic photographs or
Oh,
historical photographs of Bowling Green. Like I did this for UMass, like, and they shared pictures of like UMass's last bowl game, which was like in the 50s. And here's some guy like outside of the Boston subway trying to hawk tickets or something, right? Or
yeah.
here's our campus chapel. If it was Ohio State, you might, theoretically, it might be like, here's what Mirror Lake looks like when it actually
Yeah.
has water.
Oh,
Here's the
yeah.
oval, right? Here's other, iconic things to remind you, hey, this place is special. As you're playing the game, which is why it means so much to so many people.
Yeah. No, that's good because it's funny because so much of what matters in college football is the whole point you're making here. That's different than the NFL. It's all the stuff that's not the game. So it's like, hey, I want to play this football game. And it's like, yeah, but do you want to watch 7 minutes of what your stadium looks like and the songs they play at the stadium and what it feels like when you walk around the concourse and the statues outside before you play the game? And a lot of people would be like, yeah, no, I do.
Yeah.
Can you show me that for 7 minutes?
Because I didn't go to the Cleveland Browns. I didn't go to the Detroit Lions, but like I went to Michigan. I went to Ohio State, right? Like, for me, I was in Alpha Phi Omega when I went to Ohio State. My name's carved in that bell tower. I rang that bell. And if I see that digitally rendered, that will mean something to me in a way that's different when I see a pro
render
stadium.
your
Like,
carving? Did they render your carving?
That would be pretty neat.
That sounds a little bit. I'm going to render your carving.
No, but that, yeah. You don't feel that same way. And you're like, oh, okay, there's Lambeau Field, and I had popcorn in that press box once.
Right.
It's like that's not the same kind of emotional thing,
Yeah. Okay. So it's going to be good. It's going to be good. It's going to be interesting. When we come back, we're going to talk about like who's been on the cover and who we would like to see on the cover. We'll do that next on Kings of the North. So Matt, there's been a long history of like being on the cover of this game. Has been pretty cool. And in the beginning, it was called like Bill Walsh football. And you have a copy there with you. And it was just Bill Walsh when he was the Stanford coach, right? So look at that.
Yes, but conspicuously absent in there are anything that relates to Stanford, because they didn't have licenses for the first game. So you just had to make that connection in your brain.
Just red. But then so that was 93, 95. It was Bill Walsh. Then it was College Football USA in 96. Then it became like this version of the EA Sports game starting in 1997. And they've had like some interesting guys over the years. We only care about Northern guys. But like you think about, it is a little bit of the modern history of college football. Tommy Frazier from Nebraska was on the very first cover. Charles Woodson of Michigan was on a cover. Joey Harrington from Oregon. Everyone remembers because Joey Harrington had like a Heisman billboard in Times Square, but he was also on the cover of this. Larry Fitzgerald from Pitt. I think it's like a really cool cover guy over the years. A lot of Michigan. Desmond Howard, sort of like not right when he won the Heisman, but a decade later was kind of an interesting cover guy. And then Denard Robinson from Michigan was the last cover guy. He won like a fan vote in 2014. So let's just run through this real quick because Matt, you and I are going to pick what we think the cover should look like this coming year. And I will say, in the beginning, they were very heavy, like on recent Heisman winners. So again, Tommy Frazier's the first cover in 97. 98, it's Danny Werfel, who is the Heisman winner the year before. 99, it's Charles Woodson from Michigan as a Heisman winner. 2000, Ricky Williams as a Heisman winner. 2001, Sean Alexander from Alabama, not a Heisman winner. 2002, Chris Wenke from Florida State as a Heisman winner. 2003, as we mentioned, is Joey Harrington. They were just like, we got to get an Oregon quarterback. Joey Harrington. Man, the Joey Harrington thing, he was just, man, that guy got hyped up. I still don't exactly know why. Then Carson Palmer as a Heisman winner in 04. 05, Larry Fitzgerald, again, Pitt receiver, is just an awesome choice for that. 06, they decided, like, Desmond's famous, let's go to him and get away from like the most recent guy, like not have a player who just graduated college. It was like an interesting choice and something I think that'll affect our view of who the cover should be. 2007, it's Reggie Bush. 2008, it's the craziest cover. It's Jared Zabransky, the Boise State quarterback, which is like, right then they were like, what are we doing? How did the Boise State guy get on the cover of it?
Well, wasn't that right? That was right after the Fiesta Bowl thing, right? That was right after.
Why did they put the guy who proposed to his girlfriend, though? Why did they put the quarterback?
That's a good question, actually.
So anyway, I think they probably, no offense to Boise State, I don't think that's where your bread is buttered, no matter how good their win over Oklahoma in the Fiesta Bowl was. Then they go regional covers in 09. Deshaun Jackson from Cal, Matt Ryan from BC, Owen Schmidt, a West Virginia fullback, Sparty, the only mascot to ever be on the cover, and Darren McFadden from Arizona. 2010, again, different covers depending on the gaming system. Brian Arakpo,
right?
Yeah, Dan McFadden in Arkansas. Yep.
Yeah.
Brian Arakpo of Texas, Brian Johnson, the quarterback at Utah, Mark Sanchez of USC, and Michael Crabtree of Texas Tech. Then they go back to single covers. Tim Tebow, my God, they might just put Tim Tebow on the cover for the next 50 years. Tim Tebow in 2011, Mark Ingram, the Alabama running back, Heisman winner, wins a fan vote in 2012. 2013 is pretty cool. It's Barry Sanders and Robert Griffin III. Barry Sanders wins a fan vote as a former Heisman winner. And then 2014, again, Denard Robinson wins it as a Michigan guy. Didn't win the Heisman. Super electric guy. So, like, Matt, this is how big of a deal do you think it is, the cover of the game? Is it just a thing that people discuss, or like, does it affect sales? Does it represent something? Is it part of history? Like, how big a deal is it?
Yeah, it's definitely part of history, and it can represent something because it's not just who was a particularly famous or notable player the year before, but it also might speak to what that particular game wants to emphasize, right? If the really important innovation or theme for that game is the Heisman Trophy or the hunt to the Heisman Trophy, then you want to emphasize that maybe on the cover. If you're trying to emphasize a particular gameplay innovation or new mode, you might use the cover to tease that. I have not seen any evidence to suggest that the cover athlete himself really changes anything for sales. And I think that it's important insofar as it can help shape the hype cycle of the game. It's a great sports radio topic. It's a debate that's launched 10,000 blogs. I don't think it changes the bottom line so much, because after the first 2 weeks, everyone's going to know whether the game is good or not, and what happens with the game itself is what shapes things. But it's kind of, I think it's fascinating now, because previously, right, you had to use somebody that either just completed their eligibility, or like Desmond Howard has been graduated for years, because you couldn't pay somebody who's currently in college. Right. And now you could put anybody, current athlete, former athlete, coach, mascot, inanimate object, now that you're gone for 10 years and that you're not NCAA football anymore. This is EA Sports College Football 25. It's technically new IP. You can break and create a completely new tradition and make this whatever you want it to be.
So there are some options, right? With regionalized covers, there are options with putting multiple people on, but I have 3 people that I have as my top 3 candidates to be on the cover for this new edition of the game. One is Lamar Jackson. And I'm trying to think about, like, who did you miss out on in the last decade? Right. And Lamar kind of leaps to the top of the list there as a Heisman winner and as somebody that people would have been excited to play with in the game. because everybody loves to play with a quarterback who can run, and the guy can also sling it. So Lamar Jackson is one of my candidates. I am certainly not the only person to suggest that Nick Saban, the greatest coach in college football history, who just retired, could be a cover guy here. It's like, how often do you want to put a coach on the cover? Maybe not that much. Maybe this is the one time you would do it with the way that this is happening, that it's syncing up with his retirement. And then I do think if you're trying to go with recent college football player, if you're going with somebody off, for instance, this past year, I would go Marvin Harrison Jr. from Ohio State. Now, part of this is Ohio State is a huge brand and does not have a long history of being on covers. But I also think when you think about Michael Penix as a Heisman runner-up. When you think from Washington, you think of Jaden Daniels, the Heisman winner at LSU. You think of J.J. McCarthy or Blake Corum from national champion Michigan. I just don't know, like, how, I don't know, exciting those guys are, maybe compared to somebody like Marvin Harrison Jr., who's part of football royalty, who's going to be a really high pick in the draft. So those are my three candidates, but I would choose Lamar. And our guy, Mike Urostowski, our producer here, has made up a mock Lamar cover that makes me want to run out and buy this off a shelf. Like, Matt, how good does that Lamar cover look?
It looks great, and I love your thought process there, because Lamar Jackson is exactly the kind of person that would absolutely cause fistfights.
Yes.
If you were right in a dorm room or an apartment, because his game is built off of what we kind of think video game college football is, a dual threat, really fast, agile quarterback is the most frustrating guy to play against, period. Right. Like in my head, I was trying to kind of go through years we didn't have it, like a guy like Kyler Murray would be in that conversation too. But Lamar had was better and more marketable, right? Especially given the success that he's had in the NFL. So if you want to continue, the previous kind of tradition, I think that's a great choice. I have a lot of empathy, or maybe not. Maybe that's not the right word, but like putting Nick Saban on the cover, I think is also not a bad idea.
Yeah.
Madden has done that before, putting actual John Madden on the cover, and not suggesting that Nick is going to work as a deep strategic consultant for the game. But if you wanted to highlight somebody whose influence was overwhelming over that period of time. But this is just me personally. I'm also interested in the idea of trying something completely different, because this is a completely different entity. I think it might be kind of cool to have a cover that highlighted all kinds of different people that we missed over the last decade, whether that's a cover that's of, you do regional covers of different Heisman Trophy winners, or you put all the Heisman Trophy winners over the last decade on there and make this year's game in part a celebration of what we lost, or to go in a completely different direction and literally put a shot of people tearing down goalposts, or of fans themselves, because so much of, I think, the theme of this particular game is really fan service, right? Going back and highlighting this product is coming back, not just because of legal developments, but because it means so much to people like you who went to this place and paid $9 for a beer, or smuggled beer into the stadium, and who tore down this goalpost, or paint yourself, when it's 6 degrees outside, right? And if this is coming back because of them, I think it's appropriate, or could be appropriate, to have them be the showcase, the fan for the game cover. You can't really go wrong, because you have so many good, compelling choices. Yeah. But I think it'd be interesting to maybe swerve a little bit different from just who won the Heisman last year.
I think when I think about who they missed out on over the last decade, Lamar's at the top of that list, I think, representing 2019 LSU in some way, whether that's Joe Burrow, whether that's Jamar Chase, I think could be interesting. I think Derrick Henry as the Alabama running back who won the Heisman since they last did this game would be interesting. Like maybe Baker Mayfield could be interesting in there. You mentioned Kyler Murray. I mean, I do think there are some opportunities here. It is a little bit just like, I don't think it would be a Michigan guy, even though Michigan just won the national title. Michigan's been so heavy on this. For instance, you said, like we were talking before, Ohio State has never had, for instance, the Northern Power, Ohio State's never had an EA Sports cover guy, but they did have a different video game. Guy one time.
Yeah, there were a couple of other college sports video games, right? Like I think Sega made one for a little while. Sony. I remember growing up playing this, made the NCAA Game Breaker series for a while on PlayStation 1, I think PlayStation 2. And the first one of those was Eddie George, right? This was in
Okay.
'95. The game does not look good. It does not hold up. But like EA did not have the exclusive license this entire time. You've had Ohio State people on it before, but that is true. It has been shockingly Michigan and Nebraska heavy,
Yeah.
over the last 15 years for EA.
Of course, I counted this up because I love the North and the South can cram it. The counting like the individual regional covers as well as the people who were the full covers, by my count, in the history of the EA Sports games from '97 to 2014, 11 Southern athletes on the cover, 11 Northern athletes on the cover, and then 4 California athletes, which I didn't give to either North or South. And there, Carson Palmer and Deshaun Jackson, a couple different people. So they've been fair to the North. They have been fair to the North. And we don't exactly claim Louisville and Lamar Jackson, but like if they put Lamar from Louisville on the cover, we might just make Louisville a Northern school because it would just be, I think, the opportunity to put a guy on the cover for this first time that was a huge college player that you missed, who also is right now an NFL superstar, I think would thread a needle there, because to embrace everything that Lamar Jackson is as a 2-time NFL MVP and a huge part of the success of American football right now, but he's in a Louisville jersey. Like, what's up. Like, I think that actually is like pretty cool. And if you wanted to do like Lamar and Burrow together or something, like I'd be okay with that. But I kind of like the idea of one guy representing the game, and I would go Lamar Jackson. Okay. When we come back, we're going to wrap this up with like how Matt knows this stuff, like why this matters. It's not just making video game players happy. We'll do all that next on Kings of the North. So again, we're here with Matt Brown of the Extra Point newsletter. Matt, if people just want to think like, man, this is so interesting to me, how can they get more of your content and information?
Yeah, the original stuff that I'm going to find here about this game and about money and licensing and all the off the field stuff in college sports, you can find that at extrapointsmb.com. You can find me on Twitter at MattBrownEP.
So you have basically become, and I can say it, right? You are like the preeminent expert in the country on this college sports video game, right? You're not going to dispute my assertion there. No, you're not going to dispute it. It's fine.
Okay.
How did you set out to be this?
No,
like, I want to be the guy on this.
I didn't, and I think, and what's very ironic about all of this is like the kind of breakthrough that I got, which was the initial project proposal, which detailed some of the licensing and detailed when the game was supposed to come out, the confirmation of this entire deal. I got it by accident. And I got it by accident because I was actually working on a story about licensed beer, which is, I don't even drink. I don't know anything about beer, right? But there was more and more mid-major institutions were trying to find extra money. And so they'll partner with local microbreweries, right? And have like the Bowling Green Pale Ale or the Nevada Wolfpack IPA or whatever. And so I requested a bunch of correspondence between the licensing agents and some like non-apparel companies they're working with. And lo and behold, here's the video game. And that's when I realized this is more interesting than beer, and kind of went off from there. Right. So a lot of it is based on open records, based on communications between licensing personnel, athletic directors, associate athletic directors, business managers, and the various licensing companies they handle EA. But it's not just public records, right? They're public records requests at this point that are augmented by phone calls and by source building and actual reporting, both on the school side and on the licensing side and with Electronic Arts themselves. And on the EA side, right, I talked to members of their communication staff, and I also talked to some of the devs that are working on the game. And I do think at this point, building Athletic Director Simulator has helped a little bit, because I'm not going to consider myself a software engineer or an expert, but I know enough about like software architecture that I think I can ask maybe a little bit more informative questions than somebody whose experience is just in playing video games. Like I tell people, I'm not a video game reporter. I cannot get you unbanned from Madden. I do not know what's happening with FIFA right now, right?
People get banned on Madden. People get banned.
People apparently, this is not a joke. Like I get DMs about this. I'm like, I can't help you
for swearing. Probably for swearing, I bet.
That are like light racism. One of those two things. But my audience responds more to this than almost anything else that I write, and it's fascinating. So I want to keep doing it, and I think part of the reason that all of this is so important, right, is beyond the fact that just there's a lot of dads out there that love video games and
Yeah.
a lot of younger people. This is not a huge deal in terms of raw money for schools or players. FBS institutions do get a licensing check for their IP and their stadium and everything in there, but it's not really big money, right? It's between 10 and like $120,000, depending on how good you are at football. The EA uses a sliding scale based on the number of AP top 25 finishes you've had over a decade to determine your licensing fee. So there's going to be like a lot of mid majors that make more money than Nebraska, even though Nebraska is obviously a bigger brand because Nebraska football is stunk. But it's either way, like you make more money selling hot dogs at one football game than you do
Yeah.
literally appearing in this game. But schools would crawl through broken glass to begin it at this point because of what an enormous marketing tool it is. One of the things that concerns so many ADs and university presidents and people who work in this industry is this fear that the younger generation right now does not care about college sports or live sports in general the same way that people of my generation or your generation or other folks necessarily do. There's a big concern about losing Gen Z. And one of the ways that that generation disproportionately consumes sports content is through games. And schools realize this is a mechanism that I can make people from all over the world, but especially all over North America, who might not necessarily be aware of my school, my brand, and everything that comes with it. I can catch them through this game. Like I've told this a couple of times, right? Like, growing up in Newark, Pataskla, Granville, that whole area in Ohio, I didn't know anybody that went to an HBCU. I didn't know anybody that went to a lot of schools out west. And my first, experience of knowing these places even existed, or even the tiny sliver of what made them unique, was through this game. And then, later, as I went through the college process myself, and as I became a reporter and everything else, I obviously learned much more. But that's part of the deal. And so, people, maybe it's less of an issue for an Ohio State, but if you're Toledo, or if you're Minnesota, or if you're Iowa State, you realize I cannot buy this kind of marketing exposure to get people to care about my school from outside my state than I can through this video game. And it's one that it could benefit not just the companies themselves, but players, schools, and fans.
So when you think about, like, again, like what matters here, they want to grow fans in this way. But I would imagine, right, doesn't everybody always say that the athletic department, the teams are the front porch of the university? I would imagine the video game where you can play the teams, that's like the sprinkler in the front yard of the university, right? It's fun. So you sit up there, and then, not that it's like the number one, but it's exposure to A, potential fans, but maybe B, like potential students who would say, like, hey, when I'm looking at colleges, I know something about Boston College because I used to play them in the video game.
That's it. And it's not that, hey, I'm going to Boston College because I play with Boston College in the video game. Like, that is not a thing that really happens. But what they're hoping for is, hey, I just got a letter in the mail from Boston College. I'm going to open it because I've heard of Boston College.
Yeah.
And I've heard of Boston College through this game, compared to, say, Colby or Oberlin or any of these other places that you could potentially consider. It's just, how can I get you in the door a little bit so that I could sell you on the academics and the alumni network and everything else that we're trying to do. And that's a big, it's exactly why many schools spend money on sports and commercials. Here in Chicago, we see billboards for schools all over the place because we have so many students that we export out of Chicago, to elsewhere. This is part of that. And it's an exposure that you really can't easily replicate anywhere else.
And is this just a sign, when we think about, like, in the end, why this is a big deal? Is it not just a symbol of the NCAA being a little less stupid, right? That, like, you killed a video game that people loved because you could not figure out a way to allow athletes to be paid. So as we have embarked, and we are pretty far down the path now of paying athletes, this is a little indication that, like, the game's back. Oh, we're able to, as adults, figure this out and make people happy and make people money and not have to kill a thing because you couldn't figure out how to pay people without breaking rules of this antiquated oversight body.
I think you could reach that conclusion, but I also think it's important to remember the NCAA didn't make this change out of the goodness of their heart.
Oh,
It
they don't do
wasn't
anything
they
out
were
of the goodness of
they
their
were
heart.
not
Yeah,
visited
no,
by the spirit of the
no.
Lord and the knights and had a conversion. They were dragged kicking and screaming to this point by lawmakers and the courts.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and and you know, I've written about this a lot in Extra Points, and I imagine it's going to continue to be a theme of my reporting. That's what's continuing to happen here. So yes, we can look at this and say, yeah, isn't this better than what we had in 2018? This enhances my fan experience in many ways. Great. I'm glad you reached that conclusion. I'm not going to throw you a parade because it wasn't Mark Emmert that said, you know what, I really miss rebuilding a dynasty at Akron on my PlayStation 3, and it's time to bring this back. They did it because he was going to get sued.
But it is a tiny little indication what you described with EA Sports working with the group that is going to pay all the players the same amount of money. It's a little bit of window into collective bargaining. Like this is how it would work when we would actually get
Yeah.
to direct payment of players. This is the appetizer a little bit of like, oh, you can as a group pay players and make everybody happy and figure out an equitable way to do it.
Yeah, and that is, I think, a great insight. And I think I'll kind of wrap up on this. One of the major criticisms from a lot of ex-athletes or advocates and some economists has been, yeah, this is kind of a sort of like collective bargaining, but collective bargaining, or with Madden, the bargaining agent is selected by the players. They're accountable to the players, and the union picked them. And here, it's just some random company that the players didn't get to pick. And they don't really have a whole lot of push or pull or insight or leverage into the negotiating, into what the package will look like. I'm sure that in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, when we have the College Football Players Association or whatever that is, and they are handling the group licensing, I'm sure that check is going to go up.
Yeah.
And for the sake of the players, I hope that day comes sooner rather than later, because while this is better than what we had before, it definitely has some economic and moral problems.
But you got to start somewhere.
Gotta
And
start
we're
somewhere.
starting with a video game, which maybe sounds ridiculous, but also, if you understand how all this works, maybe makes total sense. He's
Got to meet
Matt
them where they
Brown.
are.
He is the founder and publisher of the Extra Point newsletter, Extra Points newsletter. You can find his work. You can get on the inside of, again, he is a spy. He can't say it for legal reasons on the show, but he's a college football financial spy. He'll get you all the inside information and then tell you about it. Matt, we appreciate your time here on Kings of the North. We know we will have you back. You're part of the team here with what we're doing, and we're so excited to have you. Thanks for your time today.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks to Matt Brown. Thanks to our producer, as always, Mike Urostowski. I'm Doug Lesmerises, and that was Kings of the North.